Greetings, and thank you for joining the 2020 ASPPH Virtual Annual Meeting Session, Personal Branding for Public Health Professionals. I am Nick Mahoney, Manager of Student Services, and I'm pleased to introduce your moderator today, Kelly Gentry, Manager of Career Services and Alumni Relations for Icahn School of Medicine and Mount Sinai Graduates Program in Public Health. Kelly, thank you for your time today. I'm happy to turn the session over to you.
Thank you, Nick. I am very happy to have the opportunity to moderate this session on personal branding for public health professionals. This session will cover why a personal brand is important, practical steps to establish your brand, and how to align your brand with your values. First, I'd like to introduce the panelists. Mark Miller of the de Beaumont Foundation, who is the Vice President of Communications. Mark leads strategic communications to support the de Beaumont Foundation's mission to improve the health of communities across the country. He has held leadership positions in government, health, and philanthropy, including the White House, the Case Foundation, and Children's National Hospital. In 2018, Reagan Communications and PR Daily named him the Nonprofit Communications Professional of the Year. We also have Jessica Newcomb, Texas A&M University School of Public Health Assistant Director of Career Services. A career coach with over 10 years of experience, she holds certifications in career management and resume writing. Her aim is to motivate early career professionals and career transitioners to set goals, maximize efficiency in their job search, and achieve their definition of personal and professional success. She manages career services for the Texas A&M School of Public Health and serves as the chair for the ASPPH Career Services Forum. She holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in English with key skills in synthesizing and communicating information. When not at work, she is kept busy with 3 kids. You can ask questions in writing at any time during the session by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We will hold questions until all of the presentations are finished. Now, I would like to invite Mark Miller to begin.
Got it. Thank you, Ellen and Nick. This presentation was supposed to be part of the annual meeting in March until things changed. And then we started talking about turning this into a webinar. My first thought was whether that was a good idea because everyone's so focused on the pandemic and busy with responding to the pandemic. I wondered if people would care about a topic like personal branding. But as things have evolved, I think the topic's even more relevant than it was when we first talked about it. Because today we're talking not just about branding for your career, but really branding and communication as a way to build support for the entire public health field. I'm going to talk about the concept of branding for companies and for people, why it's important for you to have a brand, and a few general guidelines. But then Jessica, the career coach, is going to give you some practical tips for defining your brand based on her experience advising students. I want to start by telling you I don't consider myself a public health person. For the past 2 years, I've been fortunate to work at the de Beaumont Foundation, which is all about public health. But before that, I worked in philanthropy, politics, fundraising, and health. And I think it's been helpful for me to bring a non-public health view to the field, which I'll talk about. And I always make sure when I say White House, I make sure people know that I worked at the Clinton White House. And that's a picture of me when I was the White House Easter Bunny. At the de Beaumont Foundation, we focus on policy, partnerships, and people. And when we say people, we're mostly talking about government public health professionals, but we really consider ourselves champions for all areas of public health. It's been eye-opening for me to see how little people understand about public health and also how humble public health people are, which I think go together. What I've learned is that this humility is often because people are focused on serving communities and people, but I think it also contributes to a visibility gap. As an example, we did a survey in 2018. The question here was, how much influence do these organizations have on your community's health? People rated hospitals, schools, firefighters, and police officers as more important than health departments. And I'm going to repeat this. The question used the word health. We're seeing this play out today in the public response to the COVID pandemic. Last night I did a Google search for public health heroes. I was happy to see 56,000 references. That compares to about 3 million references to healthcare heroes. This tweet from Ellen is just one example of how people are thanking healthcare workers without specifically mentioning public health workers. Our CEO, Brian Castrucci, didn't like this and wrote back to Ellen. We have not heard back from her yet. But what I really like is the response to his message, which is we're the and more. And I think that it's not enough for public health professionals to be the and more. So with Brian being not so happy about this Ellen tweet, I haven't had the heart to tell him that Mattel has released a series of action figures called Community Champions. You've got doctors, nurses, EMTs, grocery store workers, and delivery drivers. I want to say it's not a competition with healthcare or any other field for who gets the most attention or recognition. But when the role of public health is overlooked during the biggest public health event of our lifetimes, how will the field build support during regular times? And part of the challenge is that people don't understand what public health is. One thing we've tried to do at the DeBeaumont Foundation is to put a face on public health. Who are these people and what do they do? That discussion led to our current campaign called Why Public Health Matters. I encourage you to go to our website, whypublichealthmatters.org. We launched this with APHA, ASPPH, and many other partners. And on this website, public health professionals can upload a 60-second video about what they're doing and why public health matters now, but also why it matters all the time. In just 1 month, we received more than 100 videos. So with that introduction about why we're talking about this today, I'm going to talk a little bit generally about brands. A corporation's brand is not just a logo, a tagline, or a series of ads. It's a collection of perceptions that people have about a company. And to be successful, a brand needs to be visible and consistent. A brand is not necessarily positive or negative or good or bad. You might look at these logos. Some of you may think, wow, that makes me feel so happy and joyful inside. And others may say that makes me feel hate and anger. So a brand is what people think of you and not necessarily what you want people to say about you. If you get nothing else out of this presentation, know that you already do have a brand. This definition by Jeff Bezos applies to both corporate and personal brands, that your brand is not what you say about yourself, it's what people say about you when you're not in the room. And so what we're talking about today is the things that you can do to have a consistent brand. Branding is not just about self-promotion. Individual people's writing, speaking, and social media presence and other activities can help advance their organization's mission, and in this case can help make the field of public health even more visible and relevant to people's lives. I was telling my wife about this last night, that people don't really know what public health people do. And when you think about it, like if someone, I saw someone on Twitter who said, you know, I'm a public health student. Someone asked me, should I wear a mask? People don't see it like as a field, they see it as people. And so everyone listening to this has an opportunity to represent public health and to be the face of the field. People also have brands, and not just celebrities, but I wanted to work some celebrities in this for fun. It used to be easier for celebrities to create like an artificial persona with a PR agency because you only saw what they chose to share with the public. But when you combine 24-hour news, gossip websites like TMZ and Perez Hilton, and the power of social media, it's a lot harder to fake it. A PR agency can help shape someone's brand based on their business success, their creative work, or their charitable giving, but the brand will crumble if they don't live up to it or are not true to their values. Authentic brands avoid a traditional polished approach. They're more transparent and they show warts and all. You're seeing a lot of this now with celebrities on Instagram without makeup, with their homes, in their homes, with their kids, bothering them while they're making a video. It shows that they're real and that authenticity is attractive to people. Consumers consider a brand authentic when they feel like they can identify with it. This is just a little bit about the rebranding that we did at the de Beaumont Foundation last year. We started by saying, let's brainstorm a new tagline. But we realized that it wasn't just about a tagline, it was really about our identity. And so we stepped back and we asked really like, what makes us us? What are our core beliefs? We came up with what we thought the core beliefs were. We talked to our board about it. And together, this is what we came up with. And this is something that a person could do as well as an organization. We also engaged our board by talking about the concept of personality words. Some of these may be aspirational and not necessarily what an organization or what a person is today, but it's a good way to look at the range of who you are and who you aspire to be, what your values are, and all that. So this is one of my favorite books about branding and social media. It's old, meaning more than 10 years writing about social media makes it an old book, but I think it's really good about branding and social media by Amy Jo Martin. Her motto is humans connect with humans, not logos. And she's just done a phenomenal job creating brands for a lot of people, including Shaq. So in 2007, she held one of the first digital media positions in professional sports with the Phoenix Suns. But she was told that she couldn't help individual players. It's hard to imagine, but in the Wild West days back then, they were worried about what athletes would say on social media. They didn't really want to encourage them to use it. But Shaquille O'Neal arrived in 2008, was really interested in building his brand on social media, thought that Amy Jo could help, and she got in trouble for doing that. Her boss told her that she was a renegade, reminded her that she's not allowed to work with individual athletes, and so she quit her job. She started a company, and Shaq was her first client. And she embraced the idea of being a renegade, which is why the book is called Renegades Write the Rules. What she advised Shaq is, you've got a great personality, so be yourself. If you're yourself online, people are going to connect with you. He found that by doing things that connected him physically with people, he would do things like scavenger hunts. When he's visiting a city, he would have autographed jerseys and things like that hidden where people could find them. But he also would just say, like, I'm going to be at Harvard Square at 2 o'clock. And anyone who saw that message could then go meet him. Then people started saying, hey, if you follow Shaq, you might actually get to meet him. So really neat combination of online and in person. The way I see that play out with people is when you say you know somebody online and you're both going to be at the same conference. You're like, hey, I think it's time for us finally to meet in person. And that just makes your relationship even stronger. So Amy Jo went on to work with Hilton Hotels, Zappos, Major League Baseball, and Dwayne Johnson, better known as The Rock. The Rock is interesting because he had so many personas. He had his action movies, he had his kid movies, he has professional wrestling. A lot of people looked at him for fitness. He actually defined one of his audiences as females, so he had to make sure he was giving the females the kind of content that they wanted. But really interesting, stepping back, looking at who are my audiences, what am I trying to do? And they actually put a percentage on this that, Dwayne, like 10% of your tweets are going to be about your charitable stuff. And when you do a launch, it's going to be, 20% of what you're doing. But always finding that balance, even looking at times of day that made sense. But I think this is also something that an individual can apply to what they do. Your audiences may not be professional wrestling fans, but you do have coworkers and social media connections, people in the community, your own friends, your families. When you're posting on social media, all these people see the same thing. So you've got to think about how you do that. Opportunities to communicate about your brand and become better known in your field. So obviously speaking, writing, using social media, even if you don't have a big presence, it can still be very effective. Writing blogs, doing podcasts, applying for awards, volunteering. Volunteering is great because you get to maybe try something you haven't tried. If you want to get stronger, say in finance, just say, hey, I want to learn, I want to be treasurer for the nonprofit. And it's a great way to build your resume and, more important, build skills. Getting back to social media, it's important. There's no right or wrong answer, but it's important for you to figure out how to balance your personal and professional life online. You can't really have more than one identity. So you can't be straight-laced professional over here and partier over here on the same channel. Even a cross-channel, that kind of gets messy. So if you're focused on your professional brand, it's just important to think about, assume that your potential employer is going to see everything you posted online. What a lot of people do is they use something like LinkedIn, Twitter as their professional accounts, and then they keep Facebook, Instagram for friends and family. But there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I'm old and old-fashioned, so I know there's social media channels other than this, but these are just 4 examples. One thing I'm surprised more people don't do, because when I talk about this topic, I ask people, do you have a Google search for your name? And a whole lot of people say no. Why wouldn't you want to know what's being posted about you online? You go to Google Alerts, you put quotes around your name, and when you're mentioned online, you will get a notice. It's a really good way to monitor what people are saying about you. Also, where your articles are appearing, where your podcasts are being picked up. It's just a really simple thing to do. Unless you're like me, Mark Miller, it just doesn't work because there's way too many Mark Millers. And so now that I've kind of covered the high level of branding, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Mark. So Mark has talked about what is a personal brand, why is it important, as well as some very memorable examples. So my part is going to expand on how you can craft or develop a personal brand. So as Mark mentioned, if you do this well, it will open up opportunities, whether that's for your career, to advance your work, opportunities for funding or collaborations, but of course to advance the field of public health in general. So to guide you today, I'm going to talk about 3 different activities that you can use to develop your personal brand. This information might seem most relevant to job seekers. So for those of you who are early career professionals launching your careers, this is very relevant. If you're looking to fit to another organization or grow within an organization, relevant as well. But really this information is relevant to all professionals from a career management standpoint. We should think about these things throughout our careers. So we're going to start with a reflection activity, then go into something called a CAR report. We'll talk more about that. And then finally, an online branding activity. So jumping into the reflection activity, we're going to start by writing down words or phrases to describe your strengths or the value that you provide. So what are you really good at? What are you really passionate about? You can think about your motivated skills, which are things that you are good at, but also enjoy. Sometimes there could be a misalignment there. So you're going to start with what you know. As you think about these things a few layers deeper, you could ask others for feedback, whether that's a colleague, a partner, a friend, a mentor, asking for feedback about what are my strengths? How have I provided value? And that way you can reflect on, is any of that information surprising to you? You can start identifying themes, or are there common threads that you can pull? You can think about, are the things that you enjoy doing present, or where do those skills show up in other parts of your life? So those are all good ways to think a few layers deeper. But even if you don't directly ask others for feedback, you can still think about the feedback they provide to you by the ways that they ask for your help. When they ask for advice, how are you helping them? When they ask for your assistance with something, what are those skills that are being employed or involved there? So then, of course, we want to put these thoughts into action to make this knowledge work for us. So what I suggest is identifying some action steps. So what are some things that you can do to promote or support your brand in the next 2 weeks? So we saw a great list of opportunities that Mark shared. So whether that's reviewing one of your social media channels, cleaning up your presence, being a little more strategic, writing a blog post, a LinkedIn article. You could create a 20 or 30-second self-introduction video, for example, to share across platforms. But I also encourage you to think a little bit about how you can activate brand ambassadors. So if there are other people out there who are acting as your eyes and ears, you're expanding your reach and your impact. And I think that's how a lot of opportunities are generated, right? So the teams are discussing who could we collaborate with on this? Who would be a good fit for this role or this opportunity? So think a little bit about that. That's a little bit of a different take or a way to describe what networking is all about. For everyone, I suggest that you add do what you say you will do to your list. So if I tell someone I'm going to meet them or send them information at a certain time, I want to follow through on that. Everything that Mark has described, all of this is about relationships, right? It's not just what we think we're communicating, it's what other people are receiving and noticing and seeing. That really is what our personal brand is. So we can build trust by doing what we say we're gonna do. But next we're gonna go through some specific things that could be a part of your action plan, so ways to put this into action. So one being your lead line. And your lead line is very critical. It makes sense that most of us, when we tell a story about ourselves or anything for that matter, we start at the beginning and we go to the end, right? It's chronological, it makes sense, it's logical. Well, often the climax or the main idea is at the end of the story. And what that requires is for someone to listen to us through our entire story. When we don't know them yet, they may not be compelled to do that. So what we want to do instead is to be answer first. So that lead line is very critical to say, here is that anchor, here is that main idea. And I think this is how we become memorable. Communication is so fascinating to me because there's really this inverse relationship happening. Often the more messages or the more information that we try to communicate, the less people actually remember about us. And that's because it makes sense. The information gets muddied, things might be conflicting or confusing, right? So we have to get a strong sense of clarity about what our message is. So those questions of what is your why? What motivates you? What does success look like to you? What do you want to be known for? Who do you want to help? Those are all great questions to start out with as you think about your lead line. I also love those personality words when we think about adverbs. So how do we approach our work? So it could be strategically, thoroughly, creatively. What are some of those words? How can you make this really show your personality and be unique to you? So think about what is your lead line. We know that LinkedIn is a hub of information where we can connect with other professionals. We can look at LinkedIn profiles to see examples of how people describe the work that they do and the skills that are involved there. We can learn about the organizations that do the work that we want to do. And your headline is a really important piece. It is the statement that is listed under your profile picture and your name. And LinkedIn will populate this for you with your most recent job title, which is great. That is accurate. It is true. But I think what you could consider doing is maybe thinking about the big buckets of your background and the impact that you're making or your skill sets. You might also think about, just like this example, what is an action-oriented statement that reflects the value that you provide. And what I think this does is it shows that this person is engaged, that they're passionate about their work, that they enjoy their work. And we know through research done by Gallup and other organizations that people who are engaged are more successful in their work, they're more productive, they're more fulfilled, and they stay longer in their jobs. So what a great thing to show about yourself, that you are engaged. So I am someone who defers to action. So if you have the job title there, that's great. Continue to reach out, be active on LinkedIn, but you might let this percolate and think about what could you do with your headline. With your about section, how are we going to develop and really capture our background in a way that is results focused, impact focused, legacy focused? Because again, your why is the thing that is so unique about you and your personal brand. Nobody else is going to say those things in the same way that you will. So these are some sentence starters, some things that you could do to fill in, to think about your brand and developing that sense of what your mission or your vision is for your career. So things like, I am on a mission too. I approach my work in this way. I want to help or impact, you know, these groups of people, these topics, these areas. So what do you want the application of your skills to be? So again, this is how we can be memorable and say things that no one else is saying in this way. So this could be one kind of foundational thing, but you could include this, these types of statements in your about section on your LinkedIn profile. We also often have to answer the question, what do you do? And you know, sometimes we're talking to people inside of the field, sometimes we're talking to people outside of the field. So we're considering that as well. This could be used also in your about section. This could be used in a connection request through LinkedIn or an email, or as I mentioned here, answering, what do you do? So this is where, again, we're thinking about what is that purpose? What is that motivation we have? How do we approach our work? So we're talking about our skills, but we're also giving people a sense of what it is like to work with us. What do we bring to the work environment? Will I create problems or solve problems? And that's important as well, because we spend so much time with our peers and our colleagues. So how would you describe your background in a way that isn't just listing things? You know, we want consistency, as Mark said, across these channels, consistency from our resume to cover letters, LinkedIn profile, different social media platforms, but we need to add value. So we don't just want to regurgitate and list things. Lists aren't very compelling, right? But how can we tell our story? Okay, so think about, how do you describe, what do you do? And then, because this is so much about relationships, right? We're often in the networking process asking for feedback, for guidance, for insight, but we're also contributing. We're finding that me also moment. We're thinking about how we can contribute and connect to others. So how do you create a conversation? There's a lot of advice out there about creating a pitch, an elevator pitch or a personal pitch. When I hear that word, I don't know about you, but when I hear that word, the subtext to me is a pitch. Okay, you're selling something. You're pushing something on someone that doesn't have a need for it or a want for it. And that's not the dynamic at all. There are needs in the marketplace. There are needs, certainly global, complex public health challenges, and you have the skills and abilities to meet those challenges. So there's a symbiotic relationship there, right? You're filling these needs. But we do want to be conversational. That is the point of all of this, is engagement. We're not just plopping down things on people's heads and expecting them to digest and remember all of these things about us. So how can we be conversational? How can we be interested in other people? I think that reflects on our brand as well. So this piece here expands upon that why information. So yes, what is our why, our purpose, our motivation, but also what is the how? What differentiates us? What are problems that we solve? Also the what is the experience in our background? That part gives us a bit of credibility. But I think it's important not just to stand on a job title, right? That's really not why organizations want us. That's not why they hire us. That's not why they promote us. That's not why colleagues collaborate with you, right? It's not because of a job title. It's because of what you can do and the impact that you make. So it's important to think about these things. So we've talked a bit about a practical application of some of these thoughts and questions. This is another take or another activity that you can use to develop this vocabulary. So we focused a bit more on LinkedIn, self-introductions. This information through the CAR report can be relevant to your resume as well as interview preparation. So CAR stands for Challenge, Action, Result. And you might have seen information out there related to the STAR format. CAR and STAR are really similar, so this information aligns with that. But I find that challenge, action, result, those are the key components of a good bullet point on a resume. That's how we go beyond just listing the task to say, here was the result, here was the impact. So as we work on this CAR report, the first step is actually going to be to use what's often called a mind map or a concept map. And that's what this graphic is. And there are many different templates that you can access broadly on the internet. And the first thing you do is you add your name to the inner box here. And so your name is in the center. In the first layer of circles, what you're doing is identifying skills that are important to the field. So you're bringing a lot of knowledge to the table, right, already. And so you can fill those in based on your knowledge base, but you can also look at position descriptions that are out there. You can do an analysis looking at maybe 3 position descriptions at 3 different organizations for the same type of role, where you are assessing what are the needs that I'm seeing, what are the skills that are of interest. That way you get a sense of the composite profile that you're trying to create for yourself. So that first layer, you're entering those skills. Then what you would do at this point is to take a step back and look at your resume. Are these skills evident there? So going through and highlighting where those examples are. And what you might do is you might have a few light bulb moments and say, oh, I could have taken this example in another direction, or this role was really heavy on that and it's not represented well here. So looking at this personal branding, this marketing document can be helpful. Then what you'll do is after you look at your resume, you'll go back to this concept map, and in the outer ring, you'll add those examples. So in this mind map, and you can find different ones that the web looks different. This has 4 places for skills, as you see those 4 key lines from your name. And then the outer circle is where you would enter those examples. And just notes, not complete sentences, certainly. This is just kind of getting this information, putting pen to paper. Then at this stage, we're ready to create our CAR report. And we do that using Excel. So in Excel, you would have 4 columns, the first being for competency and skills, and then the next, the CAR column, so challenge, action, result. From our concept map, that's where we get our skills, and we move those over into this first column. Then each of those examples is a line. So we're going to go through and we are going to expand upon and make sure that we're covering these key areas. This is also really helpful for interview preparation. Just like that challenge, action, result is helpful for our resume. So we want strong verbs, relevant details, the result or outcome in each bullet point. As we answer questions, this is how we're going to structure our interview response for behavioral questions. And what I find is true is that a lot of people that I work with, a lot of professionals prepare for interviews by frantically trying to craft responses to the 50 most common interview questions or the 100 most common interview questions. What I find to be a more efficient and effective way to prepare is by having your examples be top of mind and flexible. That way you can answer those common questions, but also any twist on a question or any curveball question, any combination of questions that they could ask. So what you're going to do is in the challenge column, this is where you set up the example, a few notes about the context. So what was the goal of the project? What made it complex or unique? And I find that this really helps people to add weight to what they did. So often it's easy for us to minimize our accomplishment. Well, that's not helping our personal brand. We want to add weight to what we did to show that it was significant and meaningful. And so I find that with storytelling, this activity really helps in that regard, to not minimize it, to not say, it was easy, anybody could have done it. But no, to say, here, this was difficult, this was unique. Then in the next column, the A column, this is where we say, here are the things that I did, the actions that I took. And then the result, right? Quantifying when we can, how many, how often, how much. And with interview preparation, the C is a point that you can actually prepare even before you get to the interview. You can think about how you want to set up these examples. And then the A part actually answers the question. So this is going to help you with your skills analysis. This is going to help you go, again, a few layers deeper. It's not just that you have communication skills, but what does that look like? Is that interpersonal communication, one-on-one, large group communication? You're really crystallizing and getting clarity about what your skills are and what you want the application of your skills to be through this example. Finally, I wanted to talk about kind of a one-stop online branding guide, a resource that you can use to do all of these things. And it's called the PwC Branding Guide. So to provide you a little bit of context, PwC is a network of firms that provide advisory, tax consulting services. They're one of the big 4 accounting firms. So we're drawing here from another discipline, which is great. But they divide up this branding guide, which is an online tool that anybody can access. I believe they're going to share the link in the chat for you to check out after the webinar. But they organize the advice in these 4 areas, which I think are so smartly named. Define your X factor, understand your Y factor, eliminate your Z factor, and then ready, set, show. So this is an interactive guide where you'll do different activities related to visualization, mapping, ranking, describing. And they break it down into 3 phases. So you document, you distill, so you did that introspection, that going a few layers deeper, and then validating. And validating whether you're asking other people or whether you're just doing internal validation. So it's so well organized and just a really helpful tool. The way I like to use this, and especially think it's helpful for you all, is in thinking about assessing your strengths. Many of us want to hammer out our resume, start applying for jobs, right? We just want to be off to the races. But that self-assessment piece, taking a step back and doing this work of self-assessment is really critical, right? We're not going to have that clarity or focus or know what our targets are if we don't do this work. So I often use the branding guide, especially on the side of assessing strengths and passion. So I'm sharing just a couple of questions just as a representative sample of some of the things that you would work on if you used this guide. What was the most successful project I ever tackled? When faced with an overwhelming obstacle, what's my go-to skill? What are strengths that others acknowledge in me? And then I love this one, what might move me toward my internal vision for the future? So all of this is very action-oriented, whether you're incorporating this into a branded bio, resume, cover letter, social media, as Mark talked about, which is really important. Just thinking in general about your professional presence. These questions, these responses can help you move toward being strategic about your personal So in review, we've talked about what is a personal brand, why is it important, and how you can develop your personal brand. I love the image of a compass because we really have to get that clarity and think about what is true for us, right? In our career path, what is the story that we're going to tell? Public health is such a broad field. It's so interdisciplinary. There's a place for everyone in public health, which is exciting, but then we have to kind of narrow down and think about what is the impact that we'll have. So I find that thinking about your personal brand, it's really the highest, the ultimate form of emotional intelligence, right? Because you're deciding what you will and won't do, what you will and won't say, what you will and won't put out there on social media. So it really reduces that amount of decision anxiety that many of us can have in making all of these decisions and evaluating opportunities that come our way. So that concludes the prepared portion, and we'll be ready for questions.
Thanks so much, Jessica, for that. And I'd like to now pose some questions to the panel that the audience presented. We have some really great questions. As a reminder to everyone who's here, you can put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. You just simply have to click on the box, on the button on the bottom of your screen and type them into the pop-up box. So first question that I think goes to Mark. After you showed us that lovely image of the dolls, someone asked, what would the public health doll look like?
It's a very good question. I don't have an answer, but I'd like to have that problem. If Mattel comes, I'm sure we'll figure something out. But really, I mean, what does an epidemiologist, a researcher, or a biostatistician look like? I find that it's very hard to find photos that show the full scope of public health. We don't have a lab coat or a stethoscope or things like that. So I think that that's why it's, you know, branding as the field. It's why we created a program called 40 Under 40 in public health, because we want to show the range of what public health people do, showing real people doing this. But I think it's collectively talking about what public health is and what the impact is. But I would like to crowdsource what an action figure should look like.
Thanks, Mark. And then the next question, what lessons could we learn from Bill Gates and his branding related to global health? Because when I think of the most powerful voice in global health, I think of him, not the World Health Organization. That's a really powerful question. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think a good example of authenticity and consistency. When I worked in PR in Washington, I learned that if you're working on health issues, you're often working for pharmaceutical companies. If you're doing environmental work, you're often working for the oil and gas industry. So they have these coalitions, but it's really about what's good for their business. I think when you look at Bill Gates, he's had a philanthropic interest in this. It's not just about the number of dollars he gives. It's just he's been focused on this for a long time. He's very passionate about it. And he's also not seen as political, which is rare for anyone today not to be seen as political, but I don't really see him, you know, taking sides politically. Whereas an organization like, you know, even the World Health Organization or the CDC, you know, are government organizations. So there might be something negative to say, even though I would disagree with that. But there could be some obstacles there.
Okay. Next, this one might be more for you, Jessica. I'm finding that employers are looking for grads with only a bachelor's degree in public health. How do I sell that brand of graduate degree to explain the difference between an MPH versus a bachelor's degree?
Great question. You know, and that's such an interesting thing as we've seen this explosion of undergraduate programs in public health. At the graduate level, you're really getting that specialization in one of those concentrations. Often there are opportunities to get certifications, to show evidence of those skills. And so seeking those out can be really critical. I think engaging at a high level with professional organizations is a great way that graduate students, a great place for them to distinguish themselves, whether that's getting involved in conference presentations, they're presenting their research. But for any professional, what we've been talking about with building our network, having a brand to communicate, these opportunities really come through people. And so it's having a strong sense of the organizations that do the work that you want to do, and then reaching out to people at those organizations to build those relationships. So that's what I would suggest is absolutely go for those specializations, those skills, see what are trends in the marketplace, you know, what aligns right there with needs, and then what you can provide, and then network your way.
Thanks, Jessica. We have several people asking for advice on how to handle branding yourself and finding jobs amidst the COVID crisis, especially because there are a lot of job freezes. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. So there certainly are some areas, you know, that we're seeing a slowdown or freezes, as they mentioned. It might just be a slowdown in the hiring timeline or the process. I think part of it is being politely persistent at this time, right? We saw this, you know, massive adjustment to working from home to remotely. Organizations needed to train their people about how to do this. Communication is somewhat more complicated. So making sure that you're visible, but also again, seeing there are lots of organizations that have ramped up their hiring. So what are the needs? Where is hiring taking place? And then running after those opportunities.
Yeah,
I know there are many virtual career fairs happening,
yeah,
and events and things like that you can think creatively about that.
Okay, thanks. Mark, this one is for you. Can you maintain personal branding while working for someone, or do you have to become a CEO of your own initiative to be regarded as one with a personal brand?
Everyone has a personal brand, whether it's positive or negative. So I think that's kind of a misperception about branding, is you don't have to be the boss or own your own company. Everyone has a brand, and the question is, how do you make that consistent and strong in the things that you can do?
Okay. And this could really go to either of you. Maybe you can both touch on it, but clinical fields are much more seen. How do we promote the field of public health to incoming college and current college students? Maybe Jessica, you want to start?
Absolutely. So, and I would say, just as an example, at our undergraduate level, probably 60–70% of those want to pursue some kind of advanced education, whether that's professional school or graduate school. So I don't see the field of healthcare and public health as conflicting. I see them as complementary, and I think that complement is necessary, right? So we want healthcare to address things that public health can't, right? You know, when we think about the social determinants of health, when we think about behavior and nutrition and physical activity and all the things, I think there's a lot that we can help our students to promote about the field of public health. And exactly what we've been talking about, you know, telling these stories, making sure they're visible, getting them out there on the channels. It's not only about the individual, it is about the field of public health. So that campaign that Mark mentioned, that they're doing, the Why Public Health Matters campaign, that is so exciting to see all of these different voices and stories. Because public health is so interdisciplinary, others can really see their skills, you know, see their connection to public health. So the connections are there, we just need to make them visible.
And speaking of connections, I think it's important to not pit healthcare against public health.
Mm-hmm.
They work together. And if public health, right now what we're looking at is if public health works, there's less strain on the hospitals. And you can be creative how you talk about this, but how many lives have been saved by, you know, shutting down for a while? It's not as obvious as the number of deaths, maybe, but I think there's creative ways to tell the story about the impact.
And how do we navigate speaking about health misinformation on social media without it tarnishing our brand? It's an interesting question for me.
That is a great question. I mean, I think it is, you know, sometimes it is addressing it head on, but really I think it's sharing those reputable sources. It's, you know, sometimes the scientific process can seem kind of messy or confusing to someone who's not familiar with it, when the public health professionals are addressing and learning and making a positive impact. So I think it's promoting what we do know is sound information, and not contributing to the, you know, the hysterical voices or the misinformation.
I think also thinking about your audiences as people who trust you and are looking for information. It's important to put stuff out there that's true. It doesn't have to be a fight, but I think what you, just like online, if you have something bad happens online, you can't get rid of it. What you do is you put more positive stuff on to change the Google search. That's all kind of a online reputation strategy. And I think the same thing applies to misinformation, is being more aggressive about getting the right information out, because people trust people. They don't trust fields or organizations. Yeah. So you can have a big influence on Facebook because my friend who works in public health said this, can be more powerful than even the CDC said it.
And you actually just touched on another question that someone asked, which was, how does one erase some of the mishaps that have occurred with their personal branding?
Challenging to get rid of them. I think you need to be able to explain them and put them in context and don't make additional mistakes. I can't think of any silver bullet for that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think we'll just do one or two more questions before we wrap up. Someone said, we all recognize that public health is underfunded and undervalued. So how do we use branding to raise awareness and make lasting change for the public health field?
Something that we're very focused on, you know, working with, if you look at the Why Public Health Matters partners, we have 18 partners involved in this. So I think it's working together to, you know, leverage the resources, leveraging the messaging. A lot of it really is about messaging. And so we have another project called Phrases, which is public health reaching across sectors, working with the Frameworks Institute about what other sectors think about public health. And so you have to first understand what the current perception is in order to change that. And so we're doing some work in that area. And I think people recognize a need for it in the field. And the question is, what direction do we go in to address it?
Okay. Well, thank you, Mark and Jessica. I want to thank both of you for sharing your expertise, and all of you for attending and sharing your attention and thoughtful questions. Just a reminder that the recording of this webinar will be available shortly on the ASPPH website. As you close out of the session, please take a moment to complete a very brief session survey. Zoom will display it on your web browser. ASPPH has compiled resources and guidance from member schools and programs of public health as they respond to the COVID-19 pandemic locally and globally. You can see the link right there. And then just a reminder about some upcoming webinars. Next week, we have the virtual annual meeting sessions coming up, which you can learn more about on the ASPPH website. You'll see right here next Friday, we have one at 1 and one at 2:30. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you all so much for joining, and don't forget about that session evaluation.